Hi everyone, good evening, and welcome back to Urban Pulse GY, your planning podcast, where we highlight developmental initiatives in Guyana, navigate planning issues, and explore potential solutions. I am Chrisandria Lindbergh Finance, your host and planning coach. Good evening. Did you know that the Amerindians played a critical role in Guyana's urban developmental landscape? Yes, they did. The geographical shift that occurred with the Amerindian tribes significantly influenced European colonial strategies and their economic development in Guyana. But for more of this and other interesting facts about urban planning or history, stay tuned to today's Planning Digest segment, where we'll be exploring some interesting facts. In our last episode, we talked of the origin and evolution of human settlement. And we also looked at what would have happened during the Industrial Revolution that would have necessitated the discipline of urban planning. But today, I would like us to continue pulsating around the topic, the emergence of urban planning. Before the Industrial Revolution and urbanization, the majority of the European population resided in small villages or towns where agricultural practices dominated their lives. Their relatively self-sufficient settlements grew and developed as a direct result of the growing demand for cotton and their products. To this end, textile factories were constructed in these communities, in these rural communities, okay? But given the period that this was happening, there was little advancement in land technology. And as a result, it was strategic to locate these factories close to rivers and canals for ease of transport. As it was the most efficient mode to transport your raw materials and equipment. Additionally, another reason why these factories were located in these rural communities was that it was also the source for energy source or the fuel that powered the operation of these factories. It actually came from wood, right? So wood was the energy source, water was the mode of transportation, and we had the rural population right there. So all of these factors would have sustained these rural factories that were based on cotton. So factors such as the availability of workers, raw materials, fuel, all of these allow these factories to thrive during this period. Well, we know we get wood from the forest, and if we continue cutting the trees for the wood, at some point the forest will deplete. And that was a concern back then as it pertained to wood as a primary source of fuel or primary source of energy, right? It was this depletion that created an urgent need for an alternative energy source, which was found in steam technology. Now, with the advancement of the coal mining industry, steam technology was used to pump water from these mine shafts. This technology advanced quickly, and this was due to the advantages in energy production and its ability to influence transportation. Factories no longer needed to be located close to water sources. As a result, a steam engine began influencing land transportation with the invention of trains and rails. And these new systems of transport via land, they were more efficient to transport the raw materials from the source to the locations. Large-scale manufacturing facilities began springing up, no longer in rural areas, but now because of the link from source to urban areas, that's where they started locating their factories. These facilities took advantage of the availability of this technology and many more that would have propelled the industries in those days. So for the time, in fact, for this time in history, urban areas were now attracting labor from the rural community. Remember, the factories were no longer located there. We had efficient transportation, so raw material and equipment would have been able to be transported to cities with speed as they never saw before, right? So as a result, investors and so on thought it best to locate their factories there, and people, the rural poor, began moving to these areas, and they did so in masses. Rural to urban migration was the thing of the day, right? Creating what we know today as industrial cities. Previously, we talked about urban areas possessing distinct beauty, distinct characteristics that were linked to elegant architecture as seen in the beautiful cathedrals and castles. We talked about their vibrant community life. We talked of how harmoniously they integrated into the natural surrounding. These elements combined created cities that were not only functional but also aesthetically pleasing. And it was so for the environment, for the people, as they were able to thrive economically, socially, and culturally. The impact of the Industrial Revolution on urban areas was transformational and multifaceted, affecting not only economics, social structures, but even the aesthetics that we talked about earlier. These new factories in the urban areas, one of the things they required was more land for construction. And as a result, all the buildings that had cultural and historic values, those were demolished. And in the process, this altered traditional city layouts. Also, the architectural layout, the architectural landscape changed dramatically. Buildings were being constructed for functionality over aesthetics and over designs. And as a result of all these changes within the urban space, urban infrastructure struggled to accommodate the growing demand, the population growth that the areas were experiencing. Another area of concern also was that because there was this rapid need for expansion, it resulted in poorly constructed buildings that prioritized speed for its completion over beauty, over comfortability, over health, and even over safety. Another area that was affected was urban gardens and parks. Those that were usually used for recreation and relaxation, they were now sacrificed to cater for the factories and the housing for their workers. These and other factors resulted in poor living conditions that we spoke of in our last episode. And in case you missed that episode, you can find it on Urban Pulse GUI's Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. And while you're there, I'd just like to ask you to like, share, follow, and subscribe to our content so that you can be kept updated when new content is posted. But back to the conversation. Living condition was terrible in these rapidly industrialized cities, resulted in public health crisis. Disease such as cholera thrived in the unsanitary environment where waste disposal systems were inadequate. In response to these challenges, a movement emerged advocating for public health reform. which eventually led to the improvement in sanitation and infrastructure, which ultimately enhanced living conditions. More than anything else, planning at this stage became interested in people. It became interested in their health, in their well-being. It became interested in where people live, where they work, and where they play. It was no longer about just the built environment. It was no longer about the physical structures. At this point, planning considered people. In our last Planning Digest, I spoke of giving you guys insight into where the territorial conflict and dispute between Venezuela and Suriname would have started. But for today's Planning Digest, I want to give you context. And you'd understand it by first talking about who was here. All of this will make sense as we go along, as I continue to provide insights into aspects that would influence Guyana's claim to our 83,000 square miles, right? Guyana has a rich urban planning history that can be traced back to the establishment of settlements by the Dutch, French, and the British colonial powers. But in this segment, we will be examining urban planning from the historical perspective of our first settlers. Even before the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, and even the British ever thought about setting up their colonies and fighting over this area that we now call Guyana, the Aboriginal people were here. They settled on this land centuries before. The first people to reach Guyana were the Aboriginals, and it is believed that it was their nomadic way of life that brought them to this part of the world from Siberia. They traveled south into Central and South America in search of food and settled in this place we call Guyana. The Warao Indians, they were thought to have been here before 900 AD. However, historians believe that the Arawaks and Caribs originated right here in South America in the hinterlands. The Arawak, who many researchers and textbooks described as a peaceful and friendly people, they were mainly cultivators, they were hunters, fishermen, and it is said that they migrated here before the Caribs. I mean, the impression is that they would have already set up their societies, they would have established their settlements and all of that. However, it is said that the tranquility of the Arawak society was disrupted by the arrival of the warlike Caribs. In other words, when the Caribs came, if we should put it in our Guyanese layman term, the Arawaks bust and scatter. Yeah, but being serious, right? It is said that once the Carib had gotten here, the Arawaks, they were displaced throughout the Guyanas. And not only throughout the Guyanas, they even made their way into the Lesser Antilles, the Caribbean. And because they were now out of the way, the Caribs took up dominance on the coastal areas like Guyana. This displacement created a demographic shift that would later influence European colonial interests in the region. The European powers sought to establish their colonies. And what they found was that the Arawak population they encountered they were very vulnerable, and as a result, they were conquered very easily. But not the areas like the Guyanas, and more specifically Guyana, where the Caribs were. Areas like Guyana was hard for them to conquer, which for a period deterred European colonizers. Alternatively, the Spanish explorers prioritized colonizing regions with greater Arawak population. This was mainly due to the fact that they experienced less resistance with the Arawak population. The dynamics of the Amerindian settlement played a significant role in influencing Guyana's development, primarily through a combination of factors, including demographic, culture, and geopolitics. So the next time you are reminded that Guyana is the only English-speaking country in South America, proudly say, yes, that's true, but it's because our first settlers were fierce, strong warriors, and they resisted colonialism for a very long time. What a reason to provide. There you go, my friends. Digest on that. So, my friends, this has brought us to the end of today's podcast, where we discuss urban planning from the perspective of our first settlers, the Amerindians. Join us again next week for more interesting topics. And remember to like, share, and subscribe, and follow us on Facebook and YouTube for new content as it is posted. And remember, together we build sustainable communities and a stronger Guyana. Bye, friends.